Welcome to Class 14 of Hebrew 1 and 2 for Bright OT 500. Today we are going to combine some things we have already learned to create a new concept, and that is how do we take object markers, the suffixes that we often have seen at the end of nouns, how do we place those onto the end of verbs to create not just subjects at the end of verbs, but also the direct object. Sometimes the direct object will be connected to the verb with et. Other times it will be directly affixed and suffixed to the end of the verb. And that's the concept that we're going to look at today. Just a reminder before we begin of what the suffixes look like for objects. Again, we've already seen these when it came to affixing them to prepositions or as possessives at the end of nouns. Now we're going to be putting them onto verbs. Remember, there are alternate forms of each of these, at least in the 1CS, 2MS, 3MS, 3FS, 3MP, and 3FP, which will occur with some regularity. I've highlighted 3 of these in yellow because these particular alternate forms all involve the letter nun. Nun in the 2MS assimilates into the kaf as a dagesh, causing the comets to drop to the bottom of the letter as a vowel, rather than inset as in the normal 2MS. In the 3MS, the hey has dropped, and instead we have a nun with a dagesh, and the same in the 3FS, we have a nun before the hey, also with a dagesh. All 3 of these involve nun, however, all 3 of these will also only occur in the imperfect, so you do not need to worry about them in the perfect. So make sure that you review this chart so that you can recall what the objects are, the object suffixes, for each of the person, gender, and number. Before we can affix an object suffix to a verb, we have to prepare the verb for the object. This is very similar to the way that we put nouns into a construct form, although there is no construct form in the verb. But it's very similar in that there is vowel reduction and the shifting of accents prior to the affixing of the object suffix. So here you can see that we have propretonic reduction in that the initial comets has reduced to a vocal schwa. We can see that in certain places the accent has moved around, and that especially in the 2FS, instead of the expected ending, we have tav with a hirik yod. This instead of the tav with the schwa. This is because we're going to be adding something onto the end, and we don't want to have a schwa that combines with other things to change. So instead it takes on a more definite form of hirik yod. The comets under the tav in the 2MS has dropped completely, and the hey in the 3FS has become a tav, which we expect before other letters that are going to be potentially added. And you'll notice that also the vowel has reduced from a comets to a patak, thus closing out that syllable. Once these particular changes have taken place, the verb is ready to receive its object. So here we are ready to attach our object suffix to the cow perfect stem. Again, we have our reduced form of the cow perfect stem with the vocal schwa and the comets. We have our reminder, our chart here of what the object suffixes actually are, and then we simply affix those to the verb stem. In the perfect tense, the most often used vowel connector will be an A-class vowel. The 2FS has a sere. Even though this is a long E, still think of it as somewhat of an A-class vowel rather than an I-class vowel, as it's still very close to A, although not exactly A. You'll notice that as you look at all of these particular examples, that we have simply affixed the object suffix onto the end of the reduced verb stem, thus giving us our cow perfect 3MS with its particular object. We would do the same with every part of the cow perfect paradigm, although only the 3MS is demonstrated for you here. The same sort of changes need to take place within the imperfect form in preparation for an object suffix. Although not as many suffixes exist within the imperfect form, meaning not as many changes take place. In some, the imperfect form has a strong vowel suffix, meaning that no changes take place, prior to the addition of an object suffix, such as the 2fs, the 3mp, and the 2mp. The most common change, when a change does take place, is a reduction of the holum to a vocal schwa. Once the verb has been prepared for the affixing of an object, the object in the imperfect is typically added on with an I-class vowel, perhaps a segol or a heric, as opposed to the A-class vowel in the perfect. I-class, imperfect, which is convenient since imperfect starts with an I. Easy to remember. Even in the imperative, changes need to take place before we can add on the object suffix. In this particular instance of the 2ms, the holum reduces, and the vocal schwa under the kof becomes a kametz hatuf. Thus we have a closed syllable at the beginning of the imperative, kot, le, plus whatever is added on. We then affix our object suffix. In the imperative 2ss and 2mp, both ending in a vowel, there is no change before a pronominal suffix, just as was the case with the imperfect. In the imperative with a patak stem, those that have a guttural requiring that patak stem, or perhaps a stated verb, the patak will lengthen to kametz before a pronominal suffix. When we parse the verb, we will indicate what the object is after we have indicated what the person, gender, number, stem, conjugation, etc. of the verb itself is. So, natatika is Cal Perfect 1CS from Natan, but we say it has a 2ms suffix. The same with the second one where we say it has a 3ms suffix, again that being that unusual form or alternate form of the 3ms suffix with the nun with the dagesh in it, that nun suffix prior to the shurik. This way we know both what the verb is but also the object. Believe it or not, we are already at the end of this lesson. That's because we're not really introducing anything new, but combining things that we already know. So make sure that you know the subject markers for the perfect and imperfect, and that you know the object suffixes. Then go back and review what happens to the various verb roots as they prepare for the addition of the object suffix, and how the object suffixes are connected in both the perfect and the imperfect. Use Quizlet, memorize your vocabulary, and I will see you in class.